The ultimate question, the only worthwhile quest, is the 10x, the 100x, the 1000x increase in sustainable well-being. What path, what technology allows us to succeed in the ultimate goal of feeling sustainably better and avoiding chronic and unnecessary suffering? Now, the greatest technology of our age is information. Information is what allows us to transform identity, patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And most of our world emerges out of our identity, our default mode that generates 90 to 95% of our world and our personal reality, our habits, thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Now, the science of identity is almost non-existent. I've never received a single formal hour in the art of transforming identity in any of our cult or cultural institutions. Much of the information, the data needed to change an identity with confidence that it will lead to sustainable well-being, is also absent, right? And one of the ways that we know that it's absent, one of the ways that I know that it's absent, is the complete vacuum of questions. Nobody has ever asked me what my love language is. And yet knowing that information allows flow of value in a much more conscious and concentrated form. No one has ever asked me what my script of ideal love looks like. Right? Nobody has ever asked me what a peak experience consciously designed might look like. Right? What would an optimum change in temperature, in scent, in sensory experience look like? What would a 10x friendship look like? See, nobody has ever asked, and nobody has ever volunteered the most relevant data that correlates with sustainable well-being. And it's not personal. It's cultural. At the root of every culture is a cult of habits, habits of thinking, habits of feeling, habits of believing, habits of being, habits of speaking and doing that maintain a status quo. A status quo that in a world of infinite energy, in a world with incredible technology, ensures that a noticeable percentage of humanity is barely surviving, that a larger majority of humanity do not feel deeply secure in their survival. You have a country such as the United States with some of the highest productivity and incomes in the world, where people are just a few steps away from being on the street. A client doesn't pay their bill, an uninsured motorist rear-ends them, cancer comes, Someone loses their job because of the cancer. Someone can't pay their medical bill because they lost their job. And they're on the street. The awareness in the background, the lack of security, is a chronic undertone, even in wealthy capitalist cults or cultures. The sense of love and belonging. How many people feel deeply and fully loved? How many people feel that all of them belongs anywhere at all, let alone everywhere in their lives, right? How many people have high self-esteem, clarity about their ideals, their principles to achieve those ideals, and pride in the consistency with which they embody those principles? How many people know what their deepest gifts are and are actively building those gifts? How many have created the superabundance of bringing valuable gifts into the world and moved on to serving something more important, something bigger than themselves, transcending in the joy of service, right? The vast majority of humanity is languishing in survival, seeking more and more material success for a little bit more security of survival, and in addiction, in compulsion, to substitute for the aching need for love and belonging. What's missing, right? The 1,000 most important questions relating to sustainable well-being that could guide us towards an optimal path of sustainable well-being are not being asked by governments, by employers, by lovers, by neighbors, by teachers, by parents. By clients, by any institution, by churches. They're not being asked, and they're not being voiced, leaving us in a fog of opaque stupidity, filled with guesswork, filled with confusion, filled with anxiety, filled with failure, because we lack the information about how to flow effectively, confidently towards one another with the same precision as we pass one another on clearly defined roads at high speeds. We have flow. We have defined lanes on our highways, but we lack that flow with one another, with humanity. Now, one of the other things that we lack to a staggering degree is awareness of best practices that are iterated by the most competent people on the planet today in an active organic process. Right. 95% of farmers are using substandard farming protocols simply because they do not know what a best practice looks like in any number of areas. 95% of doctors, 95% of therapists, 95% of personal trainers, 95% of teachers. No matter what demographic we look at, 95% of parents, 95% of governments, 95% of prisons, 95% of politicians, whatever the demographic, there is a distinct minority that is achieving 10x results in that area. And they know what they're doing that works. And they know what the rest of people are doing that doesn't work. But the people living mediocre lives, growing average crops, teaching using average protocols and producing average results in their students, they don't know what they don't know. And they can't tell from an incompetent position who does know, right? The data is not available anywhere on the planet. 95% of the data we need to design highly intelligent lives based on best practices does not exist for 95% or more of the population. But if it did exist in a trustworthy manner, if the competence and the results of best practices could be measured, we could see a 10x improvement in quality of life per unit of energy invested across the entire species. We could see a 10x improvement in intelligence. So why isn't it happening? Well, the information is stored. The most valuable information nobody has generated, relatively speaking. The most valuable information that no one's asking about is inside each one of us, as is the desire to activate it, to realize it. And so what's missing? Vision, purpose, but also a platform. And so I want to talk about the important ingredients of that platform. What is required in order to liberate this 1,000% increase in valuable data? Well, there's a couple of things, so let's kind of lay them out here on a circle, right? We need good questions, questions that correlate to high value flow. So we need questions. We also need answers. And in a politically correct cult, in which science, truth, authenticity is being bombarded, in the insanity and bullying of politically correct crowds, as well as their opposite, it's very important to be able to have encrypted data, highly encrypted data that people are confident cannot be hacked. And a subset of that is metadata. It's very important that the statistics that are generated are in the form of metadata rather than personally linked data, right? In order to get a pure set of data, we need to delink the political correctness of our cult from the protocol of answering the quest, of answering questions. Right? And we also need trust. Trust that this promise will not be violated. Right? So we need trust. We need metadata. We need encryption. We need good questions. We need answers. We also need a protocol that will facilitate the generation of data at the same time that it facilitates the transmission of data. And the protocol is very simple, right? If you want to enter the door and access the data, you must provide encrypted, anonymous answers to every question you want access. If you want to learn about best practices, what's the best way to grow potatoes in Idaho? What's the best way to grow organic potatoes in Idaho? What's the best variety of organic potatoes to grow in Idaho? What's the best way to get financing to buy a farm and grow potatoes in Idaho? In order to get answers to those questions, you must answer them. First, what is the best way you've heard or know of? Are you competent in this area? And how competent are you? Why do you like the approach that you are using, that you've heard of? What are the results? What is the cost in time, money, and natural resources to get this result? And you must publish that data as metadata. And as soon as you click submit, having answered the question, you see the best available answers based on upvoting and based on competence. Right? So we also then need a system for evaluating competence, meaning we need to be able to have a protocol by which the minority of people who are highly competent in any field are distinguished from the majority. And that requires its own journey, right? Because one of the things that we need to separate is cult prestige from results. Right? Science, the world is filled with prestigious morons. People that had the right pedigree, that went to the right school, but are not actually highly competent in their arena. Right? They may be highly competent at convincing uneducated people, but they're not actually highly competent based on results. And to give a good example of this, martial arts schools have existed for decades that are isolated cliques in which it's set up in such a way that it appears that the teacher is excellent, is unbeatable, and that the training is effective at self-defense and at offense. Right? But it wasn't until a free-for-all was created in which any school, any participant in the world could use any technique, and victory was pinning the opponent, knocking out the opponent, beating the opponent in real life, or at least in an environment that simulated real life, that we actually found out which techniques of defense and offense worked at all, and then which were the best, and then which were the best people and the best teachers. And of course, the most incompetent schools would not fight in those conditions because they would always lose, right? And so then you start to separate the incompetent from the competent, right? So we need a protocol based on results, right? And sustainable well-being is the ultimate goal, right? And so there has to be a link between what's being done and impact, sustainable well-being at some level, right? Who benefits at the end of this whole long chain of protocols? How many people are benefited, and are they benefited more than doing something else, right? If you make the best hamburger in the world, but hamburgers are bad for the health of the majority of people, right? Versus you make the best tuna in the world, and tuna is more beneficial. Like, how do you gather the data over time to correlate protocols, ideas, diets, behaviors, and then within those subsets to kind of prioritize what leads to sustainable well-being and why? How is that measured? And then who's the best within that, right? If you are going to eat hamburgers, why not eat a hamburger from the best hamburger chef in the world? And who is that? And what makes that? And what's the protocol? So if you love hamburgers, you can learn from the best. So fortunately, the most competent and brilliant people in any field are generally people in love with that field, in love with that arena, or who love human beings. Because love is a powerful motivator. Because fear and insecurity is low in truly competent people. Truly competent people aren't doing it for money, because their money needs have generally already been met. And if they are, and they are truly the best, well, why not help meet their money needs in exchange for educating the world? And so we need a way to separate the cult-sanctioned from the truly excellent. The people that get better results. And we need a way to verify the impact. Right? We need a gradient of who's providing the most well-being for the most number of people. We need 360-degree feedback, right? If someone's producing a farm, well, this is the health of the workers. This is the health of the soil. This is the health of the animals. This is the profitability, right? You need a 360-degree visual of any best practice. And so that involves, upvotes by various stakeholders looking at the big picture, right? So that we can see, okay, this is the best way to make money for a 10-year period. But it's not a good way to make money for a 50 or 100-year period. It's a good way to make money for 10 years at the cost of depleting your soil for 50 years, for example, right? And you can start seeing, okay, different protocols are strong in different areas. So we need to have a protocol that makes it clear who the 1% are that know more than all the rest. And the most important basis for that is outcome, right? In real estate, you can take someone doing a good no money down real estate technology and, have that challenge. Put me in a city with no contacts and I will make $1 million within 1 year, right? With no contacts, using this protocol. And if you can follow that person throughout their life and say, wow, they go from not a single penny to $1 million in a year in net worth, well, okay, that's a good real estate protocol, right? And can anyone else do that protocol better? So thresholds, that demonstrate certain strengths. And this is an iterative process, meaning these are indicative. They're not true. One person might be a terrific salesman using a bad real estate technique. Someone else might have a better real estate technique but be bad at being a saleswoman. And so, right, they don't hit the same threshold as quickly, right? Because their real estate is better in strategy, but they're not a very good salesperson or communicator. And so understanding those, and measuring the individual talents of individual people, right? This is the holy grail, right? To identify the 1% that know the most and elect them to highlight the technologies and people who are bringing that niche, that arena of life forward. Now, simple curiosity without the cost of social stigma, the desire to be seen in a statistical probability field without hassle, gets away from lies, gets away from fear, gets away from invisibility, secrets, and hiding, and starts providing metadata that is currently not available anywhere for a few pennies, right? For the cost of electricity. We need an app that slowly builds a profile of the 1,000 most relevant points of data that correlate to an individual's well-being. And this app needs to be so successful that you would be an absolute fool not to tell the people you love most about it and you'd be an absolute fool not to use it. As you fill in a profile, a picture, I'm white, I'm male, I'm 47, I'm living in Northern California, I'm 20% depressed, I'm 30% lonely. The highlights of my day are X, Y, and Z. The things I care about the most are this. The things that add the most to my quality of experience are no sudden noises. Right. My daily routine is this. My resources are these. My ideals are these. My principles are these. My talents are these. My skills are these. My greatest frustrations are these, right? Slowly building a profile. Now, we need an AI generator, which we're not talking about anything terribly sophisticated, but just noticing the trends, the most important questions and answers for your demographic. What do other white people in the 40 to 50 year bracket living in your general part of the world speaking English, what is their greatest frustration? And of the people that share your problems, who have solved them most effectively and what did they do, right? So as you're entering data and receiving data and entering data and receiving data, exponential value is being generated by information flow. Now, the complete absence of distortion fields paid for by either the company, advertisers, or customers, the fact that you cannot buy, right? The fact that it's free to enter the data and it's free to receive the answer to the data. It makes the data tremendously valuable relative to the skew that comes from advertising or political perspectives. You can actually see truthfully what's going on, what's working, what's not working, right? Have you had a knee surgery? Who's had a knee surgery for more than 10 years? Of those, who's used this type of knee surgery and who's used this type of knee surgery? Who's had it done with this doctor versus this doctor? Who's the best doctor for knee surgery? What's the best synthetic knee component? What's the best protocol for avoiding trauma in infant surgery? These are things that individuals that are deeply affected by these things are desperate to learn and have no way of learning. You call a hospital and they say that's confidential information. You can't find the other people in that survey. Or they don't want to be found because of the cost of cult exposure. But they want to provide metadata, right? So we need an algorithm that notices the greatest sources of pain for our demographic and the greatest sources of well-being for our demographic, and that notices the most effective responses for the most successful people in that demographic who have healed that pain, what they did. And the best protocols for people learning to play a musical instrument, learning to speak a new language, learning to fly an airplane, the best protocols based on objective metrics that are set by top experts, the most competent people in that arena, right? So that's it, right? That alone, the doorway, the opportunity to share, the opportunity to vote, the opportunity to learn, the opportunity to ask and answer the most important questions, and to share that freely with a significant other, to get a prompt on your app saying, do you want to know your wife's love language? Yes, please. Well, what's your love language? Here's the text, here's the test. Take this 15-minute test and learn what your love language is. And after you click submit, you will see your wife's love language and she will see yours. Do you want to know what your partner's kinkiest fantasy is? No problem. What's your kinkiest fantasy? Fill out the form, click submit, and you'll see each other's kinkiest fantasy. Do you want to know the best way to hit a baseball as defined by the most successful hitters of all time? Okay, answer the question. What's the best way you know to hit a baseball? How good are you? What percentage do you hit? In what situation? Okay. Now you're generating the data that you're seeking. And the questions, the quests that most people answer, most people seek more than any other, gets the most answers. And the people and the things that people are most excited about are the things that they believe will change their lives. So this is a path. This is a process. This is a technology of liberating well-being with data.